I'm going to call the Board of Adjustment meeting to order. And first, we need to find out if we have any additions or deletions to the agenda. If none, motion to approve. Show your hands. Okay. Oh, yeah, motion and then show of hands. Agenda's approved. We've already done the approval of the minutes, so we're skipping on to what we did not do last time, which is the vice chair. And I see we have another needed person here who's come in. We need to elect the vice chair, and if we're going to do what we did the last time, I guess we ask for volunteers first for the
I will
vice chair.
volunteer.
You'd like to volunteer? Okay, do we have someone who will?
Just saw your thing,
And
thank
also
you.
Elise will volunteer. So we do a motion then at that point to nominate one of them or nominate both?
And then it's a fight to
Okay,
the
we
death.
need someone then to nominate Elizabeth. Okay. If we need someone to nominate Elise.
I nominate Elise.
And we don't need a second, so we're going to be voting on Elise to be our vice chair. Okay, so we have, I don't know.
I don't know either.
Can the person vote for themselves?
I said.
Because Brian did not vote?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was reading.
Okay, now you put away your pencil. Okay, yeah, okay. We are voting now for vice chair, and we only have one nomination, and that is for Elise. We need her hands up to approve. Right hand? 4 carries it, so we have our new vice chair. That's Elise Craver. And next, we do have the continuation of case number P19-01HM, consideration of a sidewalk variance in a CP planned commercial district on 5.96 plus or minus acres located at 3333 North Main Street, submitted by J. Arthur Smith on behalf of Hope Mills Investments LLC owner and Darren Balsamo on behalf of Level 5 Trampoline Park LLC agent. This was continued from last Monday, and it was continued because our plaintiffs, applicants did not appear, and it appears that they are not here again, so we will have the
That's correct.
presentation, please, Mr. McLaughlin.
Okay. Welcome, new chair, new vice chair, and fellow Board of Adjustment members. As stated, this is case P19-01HM. What I'll do is go through some basic information, provide you some photographs, and the last slide you'll see is what I call the legislative template. I'm going to have the 4 criterion for a variance, and I'll keep that up on the screen while you deliberate on the decision. So in terms of this current request, background is that request is to not install sidewalks along North Carolina Highway 59, North Main Street, and also along Davis Street. Property is located at 3333 North Main Street. Zoned under CP Plan Commercial District Regulations. It's developed currently with the Surge Recreational Facility. There's other businesses in the shopping center, but the entity that triggered this SIWA requirement is Surge. The site plan for this development was approved and granted by the Board of Commissioners on September 25th of 2017. 5-foot sidewalks as required by the ordinance are required along North Main Street, and 4-foot sidewalks along Davis Street. When I get to the site plan, you'll see the portions of Davis and the portions of Main Street that the sidewalk requirements are applicable. And that what staff ultimately did is the developer came to us shortly before their grand opening, indicating that they were not aware of the sidewalk requirements. So our chief building inspector issued what we call a temporary certificate of occupancy that allowed them to open, and they're currently still on a temporary certificate of occupancy until this case is presided over. So the temporary CO was put in place to allow them to have time to file for the variance request. In terms of zoning, you see the subject property outlined in yellow. This is a commercial corridor in the town. The large R10 piece that you see to the south is actually Town Hall or the governmental complex or the park. So that doesn't give you an indication that that's a residential area. This area is zoned under residential zoning districts, but you do have residential and commercial throughout this area. In terms of land use, as this is a commercial corridor with residential around, you do have a variety of different land uses that exist. This is an aerial photograph. If you notice, when I say the site plan will show, and the site plan will show a little bit more definitively, but this area here, and then this area back here would be the only areas that when we say a portion of Main Street and a portion of Davis Street where the sidewalks would be required. This is a soils map that gives you the location of hydric soils and hydric inclusion soils. This gives you the location of existing water and sewer. Now this is the actual site plan. So what you'll see is, even though the site plan show all of this, this is an entrance here and an entrance here. This is the portion of sidewalks along North Main. This is a separate parcel that's not part of the development. This is technically a traffic outlet. So you're talking about just from here to here. This is a separate parcel, and you're talking about from here to here. So that entire shopping center that you see out there with the Jiffy Lube and everything else, those are separate parcels that are not part of this. So that's what the requirement means when it says a portion of Main Street and a portion of Davis Street. And here are your site photographs. This is a view along North Main Street. Also, there's technically what you see in these photographs is there's a large retaining wall along North Main Street. The sidewalk from curb along the street to that retaining wall is about 7 feet. So it's a 5-foot sidewalk that you have to fit in between that area. This is another view along Main Street. And this is from the parking lot of the development. This is a view along Davis Street. And also, incidentally, Davis Street is a dead-end road as well. This is a view directly across the street from the subject property. This is another view along Main Street. It's another view on top of the retaining wall along Main Street. This is a view across the street along Main Street. The subject property is on the left side of your screen. This is a view from the subject property across Main Street to a vacant commercial structure. This is another view along Main Street. Subject property is on the right. And this is the legislative template that I said I'll keep it up. This concludes my presentation of facts, but these are the 4 criterion. They have to meet all of these, and it does require a 4/5 vote, but I like to leave this up so that as you're presiding through, you'll know what the criterion for approval is.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Couple questions for you.
Shoot.
Just for me. I know they used to do I'm assuming they still do like a condition of approval sheet
Yes.
that lays everything out. Was the sidewalks on there?
The condition sheet, what you have in your packet, one thing I put in there is I put not only the condition sheet, but you have the zoning approval that was granted. If you notice on that front sheet, when I granted the approval, I think it was May of 2017, it clearly indicates that sidewalk, this is an approval pursuant to the site plan approval that was granted by the Board of Commissioners, and there was a note at the bottom that lists that case number. I attached that condition sheet to my approval and indicated at the bottom that sidewalks are required. That was given at the start of construction.
Did they sign?
Yes, they signed it. So ultimately, even though 8 months later when they came to us and indicated they were unaware of the sidewalks, I produced that document to them just as proof that they were aware of it, but we still actually worked with them and allowed them to open with the temporary CEO, allowing them to make this application. But
Another
Well, another part is that condition sheet is given to the applicant and is part of the packet before the Board of Commissioners even approve the site.
yes,
Yeah.
that is correct. So before what she's indicating is before the Board of Commissioners even granted the site plan approval that triggered the sidewalks, the county, even at the time they're applying, we work very well with the county, and we indicate a lot of these requirements to them very early on. But at the filing of the application, before it was even heard by the board, they're given a draft set of these conditions where it's very clearly indicated what the requirements are.
I'm pretty familiar, with that process. I've dealt with it for several years, whatever. I just wanted to make sure they signed knowing the requirements. My other question, and I'll be quiet. Not to be rude or anything, but how are we gonna hear this when they're not here? I know it says that they don't have to be present, but still, if they're requesting a variance on this, how are we?
Yeah, based off of what?
I will indicate to staff,
This
this is the applicant.
okay?
Okay.
There we go.
All right, now my question, if I can have the floor. Am I good?
Yes, Ms. Cooper, yes.
Okay. I'm looking at the signature, Sammy Watson. Who's he?
I think Sammy Watson is the general contractor. This is Mr. Vance McAllister. He's been the main point of contact.
Okay, well, the contact on here is Darren Balsamo.
Balsamo.
Who's that?
That's someone else that works with the company that is doing the construction. So what happens is a lot of times you have an owner, you have an applicant on behalf of the owner, and then we may have a general point of contact that's a contractor or
So
things
what
of that
I'm
nature.
seeing on here is that neither the owner or the true applicant signed this paperwork.
I-
They signed the application to apply for the variance. They may or may not have signed the actual permit.
Yeah.
Yeah,
'Cause-
the application for zoning permit is signed by Sammy Watson, and it says the contact is Darren Balsamo. I can't read the signature, well, this is zoning officer's signature, so that would
Yeah.
be you.
That's mine.
So that's kind of my issue here is if we're talking about the requirement being to upgrade that property, my understanding is the people who are on the hook for it don't actually own that property. They are just leasing it or something.
The people who are operating SERS do not own the actual shopping center.
So we want to force somebody who is leasing the property to improve the development for someone else?
That is typically part of the general business of the town. There are several.
We don't, let me put you like this, when we put out the condition sheet, it doesn't matter to us.
Who's doing it, the owner or the applicant, yeah.
It is a conversation between the two of them on who ends up actually.
But neither one of them signed this paperwork.
You mean,
Okay.
you're talking about the zoning application? Because
Yeah.
what typically happens is when you're doing an application for a variance or something like that, you're dealing with. That's what I'm getting at. So what typically happens is you may be dealing with a property owner and an applicant at the variance application level. But when we're talking about these zoning permits you have in your actual packet, that's a contractor that we're typically dealing with. So as long as that contractor has the authority on behalf of an owner to actually permit the project, we aren't looking for the same signature on a variance application for someone. We're basically dealing with whoever has authorization to come in here and file for a permit to construct the project. So sometimes you will have a different person that's the GC that's permitting it, that's different from someone who may have gotten an owner's signature to file the application. But on our issue is we're just simply enforcing the regulations. Who is ultimately on the hook to do that is a conversation between the owner and the person who is his tenant. Now, I will tell you, in the spirit of what I think you're saying is we have moved forward with some legislation in the last year where we have noticed with some sidewalks and some certain developments where you have a tenant who is actually doing something in the building they don't own. Sometimes for a small operation like a beauty salon or something like that, you're not dealing with someone who has the wherewithal financially to put in sidewalks when they're just trying to open up a beauty salon. So we passed an ordinance that allows for some thresholds to be put in place where if there's not new construction or
Right.
if it's not renovating.
one of the things I was reading through this and I highlighted some of the areas, but one of the things that, it talks about is when, more than 1 acre of ground is disturbed and things of that nature, certain, requirements then come into play. Not necessarily the sidewalk, but other things. And I'm pretty sure from my own knowledge of the area that they didn't mess with anything outside of the actual building.
That's
So-
correct.
So
Let me jump in and
Okay.
remind the board that your own personal knowledge, facts you know before coming into this meeting can't
all right,
come
so
into
then let
play
me
in your
ask,
decision.
did they disturb any of the ground
And
external?
what you have to understand too with the
of the
condition
building.
sheet, there's just a list of conditions.
Right.
That condition you're talking about is if they disturb
Right.
more than 1 acre, then they have to get a stormwater permit.
Right.
Because they didn't do any exterior construction, it just didn't apply.
It would seem to me, though, that for something like a sidewalk, that would be under that heading because he didn't change any of the exterior. That's what you're just telling me. He didn't change anything from the exterior of the building that he doesn't even own.
The only difference is that, and this is just the timing of it, that ordinance that we passed was passed after this project
That's
was
right.
approved. So
Right.
this project came before us before we actually had a chance to put. Now it's projects like this and other projects where after you see a couple of them get approved from site plan approval and they don't move forward because of the regulations. I track some of these things. So as I saw that becoming a trend, I went to the Board of Commissioners and we got that ordinance changed where now if it's not renovating more than 50% internally or if it's not new construction, sidewalks will not be required. The issue is that this project came before that.
Well, is it fair, I would say, to punish him for opening a business before you came to that conclusion?
Let me jump in on that because I want to make sure we're all clear.
Okay.
Again, the issue for the Board of Adjustment here is not whether anything is fair or unfair. We're
But there's a
looking to
different
apply-
ordinance in place now.
Right, but we're applying the ordinance that was in place at the time.
But he's
So we can't
requesting a
consider-
variance now,
But we can't consider the current ordinance or why the current ordinance was passed.
even though the variance is being discussed now?
You have to look at the
Yeah.
variance conditions, the criteria for getting a variance from the ordinance in place at the time. Because the ordinance in place at the time is the ordinance at issue here. And so we can't look at what has changed in the ordinance. We have to look at what the ordinance was
Well, I would
at the time.
All right.
And then we have to look at whether the criteria presented by the applicant meets those 4 standards in order to get a variance.
That's what's
from-
before you this
So
evening.
the last thing I want to say, and then I'm going to stop because I'm not trying to take over here. The requested variance is consistent with the spirit, purpose, and intent of the ordinance. I would say that that does not apply here since you've already gone ahead and reconsidered.
But I think what he's saying is it's the ordinance that was in place at the
Spirit,
time.
Purpose, and intent of the ordinance at issue.
Right, and that's what I'm
Not
saying.
Not the changed ordinance.
Right,
But
but
the
what I'm
ordinance at issue
saying-
at the time.
Right, and what I am saying is, the ordinance wasn't put in place everybody's been grandfathered who already existed. The building that has taken place, they were aware of that. And I'm not saying that the people who signed the application and did the paperwork were aware of that, okay? But the guy who's leasing the property, can we conclusively say he was aware of what the ordinance
Yes.
completely said?
That's correct.
And can we say that the ordinance, when it was written, would put a lessee on hook rather than the owner of the property?
Prior to the change, the ordinance did not distinguish whether the lessee or the owner was
But was
required.
that
It just,
intended by the ordinance? Or was it an oversight?
So when this case was approved, the ordinance stated that anytime a non-residential development happens, sidewalks are required. So in this case, it went from a grocery store to an or rec.
Well, there was
Change-
10 years between those
It
two.
was change in use, so that requires site plan review, and the zoning ordinance is what required the sidewalk, not disturbing any land or anything. That when the property went through a site plan review, the zoning ordinance required the sidewalk.
As a reminder on ordinance interpretation, if you recall from our presentation, what you need to look at first is the language of the ordinance. And
Right.
if the language of the ordinance is clear, you have to go by the language in the ordinance. If the language in the ordinance is ambiguous or unclear, then you go and look at intent. But if the language in the ordinance is clear on its face, you don't look at the intent.
Well,
look at
and
the
then
language of the ordinance.
even my question on the ordinance is that it talks
When I
about
say
the.
intent, I mean legislative history.
Right.
Yeah.
What it says there is that the owner gets the notification that there's, something awry, okay? And it says that, it's all about the owner being, on the hook per the ordinance. And then later on in the subset, it was one of the questions I asked, who's the other people? So the lessee is the other people.
The application may have listed an owner, but the ordinance makes no distinction on owner versus lessee. It just simply says, it still doesn't.
We're talking about Hope Mills ordinance or Cumberland County ordinance?
Hope Mills ordinance. So what the change in the threshold we made just alleviated the regulations slightly. It still basically says that if you do new development, sidewalks are required. It doesn't say sidewalks are required by the owner or sidewalks are required by the lessee. It just simply says sidewalks are required. So in a lot of these situations, if I own the property and you come to me to do something in my property, if we work out a deal for me to put them in on my behalf, that's great. But to staff, we are simply just enforcing the ordinance regulations.
May I add something here?
Yeah.
I'm not getting into the questions until we've heard Mr. McAllister speak also. But all it really says is when a non-residential development is proposed along a minor thoroughfare or higher classification street, sidewalks are required along the thoroughfare or higher classification street. Then it has the standards.
Yeah.
And of course, you did say in your draft conditions that you had to find out more specific specifications from building and zoning, I believe.
Well, what I was ultimately
Yes.
saying with that is in terms of the level of renovation they did on the inside, but I do think they pretty much renovated the entire building.
May I ask,
Yeah, go ahead.
when you said that their application triggered the need for the sidewalk, what level did you consider triggered that need?
It's just the portion that said non-residential development. So in our ordinance, if you are doing a change of use, it requires a site plan review. And then under that scenario, if the level of work you're doing under that change of use anticipates the development of a property, it triggers sidewalk requirements, meaning that the portion that you just read, development of non-residential property, sidewalks are required along thoroughfares.
Excuse me, were there also changes in the parking requirements as a result of the change? I'm just
No,
trying to get a
it was all internal. The only thing they did with that entire development was internal. They didn't do, and they were not required. They didn't propose to do anything exterior. It was just all an internal development. But they put a sign on the outside of the building. But the ordinance regulations in terms of the site plan approval was triggered because of the change of use. It went from a grocery store to indoor recreation, and that's what brought in the sidewalk requirements.
Another question, and I will be asking more once he's had
Yeah.
a chance to speak as well, but another question was, since you have planned for a while, for instance, in the Southwest Cumberland Land Use Plan, you say in there that there should be sidewalks on both sides eventually. I mean, that's what we're aiming for. Every commercial entity should have sidewalks, both sides. You also said in your draft conclusions that there was no immediate DOT renovations or anything that were planning to be done, but that it is an area of major concern, and I'm paraphrasing. So they're saying that it's a main street, that it needs some attention. I don't know if they meant according to safety standards or a further widening of the street, but they said that that area needed to be addressed, but it said DOT did not plan anything immediate for that street. Are you aware of what DOT might be considering, and is there something in a drawing of some sort that shows how much of the right-of-way is DOT's on their property? I didn't see anything like that in what was given to us.
Typically, to address your last question, the right-of-way on that portion, the DOT right-of-way on that portion will be determined because in that packet, a driveway permit, they have to get approval from DOT. So at that time, based on my experiences, that's when the GC or the contractor would find out how much right of way they would have for DOT, because the sidewalk installation is approved by DOT. The other portion is based on, now what was the first?
Was if you could see where it is and if they're planning to do.
Okay,
any-
in terms of future development, they just put it.
Chancellor,
Yeah, go ahead.
I think potential future development by DOT would probably be not be germane to the issue of a variance. That might be
Okay.
outside of the scope of what we ought to be discussing at the hearing.
I was only thinking of how much actual space was available, because what we see on all these pictures, it's hard to determine when you see the little wall.
In terms of the available space, I went out and
That's what
measured
I'm
it
talking
today.
about.
From back of curb to the actual retaining wall is right at about 7.5 feet. They will be required to put in 5-foot sidewalks, and just as another finding of fact is there's 2 power poles in this area as well that would have to be relocated. Now, but that approval, the location of the sidewalk and the relocation of all that would be a part of the approval they get from DOT. We're just strictly enforcing the regulations to require the sidewalks. Once they get an approval from DOT, DOT would indicate to us that that approval was granted. But it's during that process that the applicant will find out how much right-of-way is available and things of that nature.
I believe Ms. Craver has a question.
When was this ordinance passed for the sidewalks?
The initial ordinance or the relief from it?
No,
The ordinance.
Initial
Ordinance.
ordinance was
It was
in
revised
80.
in 2015 to read the both sides of the street narrative, and then it was revised again recently, but it had been revised probably about 2 years before this case.
have you had any other business along there to come to ask for a variance on this ordinance?
Ironically, the property next door, which is Papa John's, they're having the same issue. There's a Papa John's property is about 40 feet wide. They wanted to do a freezer in the back. The same requirements kicked in. We're working for them. I think they're gearing up to file for the same request. So that's the adjacent property as well.
And they will be the only other business that has even talked about changing the ordinance or asking for a variance.
We actually granted a variance for a property across the street that we did a special use permit for a daycare for, and I think one of the things that we one of the things that we granted a variance for on that is DOT, and this is leading into what Carla was saying, DOT has current plans to widen Rockfish Road and Golfview, and those plans include the installation of sidewalks. So, speaking on the past board, I think that was what factored into them granting that request for a variance. But we have had a few of these over the last year or two.
Excuse me, let me ask about one more. I'm sorry, did you have another question?
I know, that's all I
okay.
need.
In the same vein, what about the old music store across the street that has had a change in use to a doctor's office or something like that?
They never moved forward with the development of that.
They,
They did not, it's, right now that property, and this may be getting outside of what we need to talk about, but that property is, one medical office, 2 general office. We recently had someone come in who was thinking about changing the general office into a medical office, but because that site was already approved for a medical office and a general office, a doctor's office moving on to that property would not be considered changing.
I thought it already opened up, thank you.
No.
I thought it had
Yeah.
already had been done, and it may have been based on the last sidewalk ordinance. That's why I was asking. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, if those uses are already approved on the site and it just changes hands,
Mhm.
then that's not considered a change.
Okay. Any other questions up here before Mr. McAllister speaks? And I believe he has to be sworn in first.
He does.
Did you?
Nobody else? Okay.
Yeah.
He signed in.
He
you gotta
signed
swear
in, he's
in
got to
back,
be
but-
sworn in.
Yeah, I'll just make sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, we're ready.
Put your left hand on the Bible, raise your right hand, and repeat after me. I swear to tell the truth,
I swear to tell the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
So help me God.
So help me God. So where do I start? I guess first let me introduce myself. I'm Vance McAllister. So this Surge property here was the first property I partnered up with Darren and Drew Breeze to build these parks around the country. So this is where my involvement first came in. As far as the permit, that was already applied before I ever partnered up with them on the whole thing. I didn't see that until the very end when we applied for the permanent CO. I guess Chancellor, you had been telling them to make sure we're aware of it. They can tell you I've been on this property since day one, and no one ever made me aware of anything about sidewalks, or I would have prepared for it, went back to the property owner and said, hey, look, if we're fixing to improve your property, we're either going to split the cost, I'm going to take care of the labor, something. We would have worked out something need be. So we get down the end and we're ready to open the doors on a building that's been sitting vacant for, I hear stories from 10 to 15 years till you know it. And let me tell you, this landowner has not been the most pleasant to deal with throughout the whole process of trying to turn it into a family fun center for Hope Mills. But we got it done. So then Chancellor, whenever we go to get the CO, he brings it to my attention, he shows me the permit, and it clearly states on the permit, handwriting, at the bottom, that sidewalks will be installed on the front and on, it's a little bitty strip on the back, not far at all, Davis Street, that's right. So, here we are, need to open the doors. We've done so much money into this thing. People are excited wanting to get it open. So the town of Hope Mills was very gracious in offering us a temporary CO, so we could get open, and start recouping money. And it's been one of our top 5 stores in the country. It's been very well community supportive, and we're happy with it. We're happy where we're at. We want to be here, but at the same time, we want to play on a fair playing field. So when I first started looking into the sidewalk, what raised my suspicion was Papa John's, which he alluded to it, that sits in our front yard. I mean, in our parking lot, they come through all the time, has no sidewalk, but they have a brand new freezer out back. There's a thrift shop that opened after we did, that's right next door to us in the same shopping center. There's a credit union that opened before we did, came in after we started and before we did, that sits right beside us. And then, of course, you have the DMV, the Allstate and all that down there, but somehow Surge is responsible to put in all the sidewalks for the entire property. Well, I mean, let's just talk common sense. What is fair about that? We should have had an option to be able to go. I personally feel like it should fall on the landowner. And the landowner come back to us, come back to Allstate, come back to DMV. Everybody said, look, you're all going to chip in. I'm going to raise your triple net, whatever it takes to do if it was something to do. But as far as I know, the landowner, he still says that he has no knowledge that sidewalks are required to be put in, because it was triggered by a permit of a change of use that we applied for. Now, again, I'm not saying ignorance is any excuse, but this is something I found out in the 11th hour of the whole process of trying to get done. That's what's got us to this point where we're at today. When there's no sidewalk on this side and there's no sidewalk on this side, to me it seems kind of ridiculous to build a sidewalk to nowhere. You kind of just putting a sidewalk there's a trip hazard on each end until the sidewalks get in. I could totally understand and appreciate it if sidewalks were coming all the way up from the south, or sidewalks were coming all the way up from the east or the west or the north or whatever, then absolutely, we probably need to take this a little bit more serious at this point in time, that we need to get it built. So that's why we're asking for a variance, and we're not trying to totally get out. I appreciate trying to do sidewalks, and I know it'll upgrade the community and look better, and it'd be better for everyone. But what our goal is, if we have to install sidewalks, is give us the option to be able to push it back to the owner of the property at a time when the sidewalks make sense, because everything else is coming in place in a timely fashion. So if the sidewalk adjoining to us or behind us gets put in up to our point, then that triggers us. We need to go ahead and within 90 days, go ahead and install the rest of the sidewalks until we're the final domino. And then whoever's on the next side of us, they can pick up that fight and carry it on, or they can go in and put theirs in, or whatever it may be. Other than that, I mean, I'll probably miss some things, but whatever questions y'all have for me, I'll be more than happy to answer and try to shed some light on how we got to this point.
Okay. Ms. Craver?
You're trying to tell me that the owners of the shopping center there hasn't asked for this,
No, ma'am.
a variance, and you're just a renter
Yes, ma'am.
in that? I don't understand that. I mean, I really don't understand.
Well, the discussions
how
I had
it's
with,
on you and not the owner of the shopping center.
with Chancellor about it was that the variance, I guess, does not pick and choose who. So because the owner didn't apply for the permit to change it from a grocery store to a indoor family center, we did, then we triggered the ordinance, which, you know, I mean, I think we can all sit here and agree that this ordinance probably wasn't thought out the unintended consequences that it would have when it was put in place, which, I mean, that's fine. That's how we just got to get to the point to where it makes sense. But that's what triggered it to start with, was because RGC applied for the contract, and I'm not making an excuse for him, but obviously he didn't pay attention. They told him, you got your permit to go ahead and well, our first permit was to demo, and then to paint, and then to install. So when we got to go ahead to get the permit to go ahead and demo and get the old ACs out and all that stuff, he was just happy we got a permit. Nobody paid attention to the handwriting on the bottom that said sidewalks to be installed. And again, that's no excuse, but that's kind of how it slipped through the cracks. Now, had the landowner, the property owner got it, because it does increase the value of his property, then you would have thought he would have stepped in and said, hey, here's what's in your lease. And then we could have had that argument, okay, so we got to build the sidewalks for the DMV, for the Allstate, for everybody else in this shopping center. Okay, we will or we won't, but at least we would have had the right to have that argument appreciated, but we didn't.
Mr. Morley has a question.
Yes, sir.
This may not be directed right at you, but for the attorney, maybe, question. Getting back to what he said, is that an option that we can look at, where he just said that, you know, give him time and to go back to the owner and try to figure it out, and at the time that, or maybe do a variance on it with the understanding at the time that sidewalks approach that property, that they
I've
put them
been on
in
the hook.
then?
I guess
And
what you're asking
continue
is,
with it?
can you put a condition on a variance?
Mm-hmm.
And let me look at the, do y'all
Because
have the
he,
ordinance?
if I'm not wrong, you said,
I have 160A and I have the 102.
Yeah.
you said you would be willing to do it at a later time if it wasn't a sidewalk to nowhere, as you said. Say another development triggered a sidewalk up to your property
Right.
from
And-
either direction.
Wait,
My
wait to be recognized,
okay.
please. Okay, Ms. Cooper.
My other question for the attorney, honestly, is, you know, all through all of this is whether or not we're keeping in harmony with what's going on around that particular piece of property. And, you know, if we're talking about just throwing on a sidewalk, like you said, to nowhere, is that keeping in harmony? You know what I mean? Especially when there's none across the street. You know, there aren't any that even come close to your
Right.
property. So, or not even your property, the property in question. I don't find that is in keeping in harmony with the
Well,
adjacent
my only
areas.
request would be, is to put it back on the actual property owner, which ultimately is going to fall back on us. Because, I mean, it's like, I mean, we own property throughout the country elsewhere, and I mean, always when we have to do something that's because of a certain tenant coming in, that's where we pass the buck back to. Now, we may pass it back in their triple net, we may pass it back in their monthly rent, but somewhere, and we're going to have that discussion, and this is going to be why your rent went up $50 a month or whatever, was because, you know, we had to do this to meet certain ordinances to do it. That's the only thing that I would say I feel like is unfair to us, is we've been tasked because we put in the Family Entertainment Center in the center with the entire property of putting sidewalks. You know, I mean, but everybody else is, and I get it, some of them was there before the ordinance, some of them was there, some of them came after the ordinance, and like Chancellor explained to me when that happened, it was because they didn't get hit with it because we had already got hit with it, correct? That's why whenever they changed over to the thrift or to the credit union, they didn't trigger anything because we had already triggered it. So then we blunted the whole shot, you know, we took the whole burden of it.
Excuse me, may I ask
Yes,
something?
ma'am.
Who is this J. Arthur Smith for Hope Mills Investments LLC? He doesn't own the whole property,
I want to say JR is like the property manager.
but not just for Surge.
No, he
It's
has.
for the entire building.
That's right.
So he would have been the representative that we needed to have here
Right.
to defend his ownership
Correct.
in the place, okay. And he did not show up either time, okay.
And let me
That's-
apologize for last time. Chancellor texted me that morning, and I think I just got off the plane in Lafayette, Louisiana, and was doing some stuff down there with Drew on some new entertainment centers that we're trying to build elsewhere, and it totally slipped my mind from the first time it got canceled to this time, and it was kind of hard to get from Lafayette, Louisiana to here, and I think I had about 4 hours by the time I got your message to get here. So this time, I actually left Lafayette last night about 6 o'clock and drove all night to Columbia, and then did some things at our property there, our surge there, and made it up here. So I know 10 minutes is no excuse, but Hope Mills traffic is terrible. They got to widen that road out there.
So, may I ask Chancellor just for a second, when did did these other businesses apply for their change in use?
Well,
For instance,
technically, it's two pieces of that. Those businesses were not technically changes of use, because when you have a shopping center and you're talking about retail, if a retail use comes in and another retail to I guess replace another retail, that's not considered change of use. This went from a grocery store to indoor recreation, and even after that, even if those uses were considered changes of use, when his came forward, and it's just the unfortunate timing of it, the sidewalk triggers for the entire shopping center. So it's not going to trigger a portion of sidewalks along Main Street, because a portion of the shopping center is done. It's going to trigger the sidewalks that abut that entire shopping center for any change of use, and it just so happened that his came first.
what about the DMV? When were they, no, what were they before? I don't remember.
I'm not sure what the
I don't
DMV was
believe that
before.
they're considered retail sales, and I think it might have been before, which would have been a change of
Feels like it
use.
when you go there.
This one, when it was approved, it was for a grocery store and shops. Now, the state employees credit union used to be in there, so when it switched to another bank, that's not a change in use.
Right,
And
okay.
like I said, when you do a shopping center and it's retail, that's not a change in use, but on their original site plan,
It
this
was the
particular
Bi-Lo.
suite was indicated as only a grocery store. So when you change that to indoor rec, that is considered a change in use. And the fact that this is a shopping center and you come into situations like that is specifically why the condition does not delineate between owner and tenant. The condition does not say who installs the sidewalk. Technically, the owner still could be required to put in the sidewalk if they talk about it between the two of them. It doesn't state who is responsible. It's just because this business came in and had the change use done that it triggers sidewalk requirement.
Can I speak?
Yes.
I'm not questioning, like, the reason it was triggered. I do believe that that was a valid trigger, but I do think, a variance would be consistent with the spirit and purpose and intent of the ordinance. And I do believe that the variance would be in keeping in harmony with the properties around it. I would like to know what the answer is on the conditions to a variance.
Yes, the answer is yes. You
So we can put a condition.
As long as it's
Yes.
related to the purpose of it.
Yeah. Well, does anyone have any more questions of either gentleman here?
I'd like to
Yes,
make
Ms.
a
Kramer.
statement. I
Yes.
think the whole thing goes back to who owns the actual property. You know, if he's just a renter, just a tenant, why aren't all the other tenants in here with him having to ask for the same variance? Now, if the variance was passed after the shopping center was built, then I guess they would be grandfathered in. However, if it wasn't, the owners of the shopping center, looks like to me, are the ones that should put in sidewalks. And if he wants to bear the cost, or the tenants bear the cost, then that's up to them. But I don't see how you're here in the first place asking for a variance for a shopping center that's not even yours.
Well, just to kind of piggyback on what she indicated, our ordinance makes no distinguish between owner or renter. And second, because of the way the entire development was approved, The only use that was specific to one use was the grocery store. Everything else is just considered retail or shop. So those, and it's just unfortunate that happened in this unit, but those other shops can change in and out and not trigger a change of use. When they went from a grocery store to an indoor recreation, the change of use is what triggered the sidewalk. So there never would have been a situation where the other tenants would have been required to put in sidewalks because the nature of their change did not trigger change of use through a site plan approval.
Mr. Marley has a question.
For you, getting back to what you said earlier, would you be in agreement with that, a variance with a condition?
Which condition would that be?
Uh,
Would it be falling back on the landowner or the whole property
well,
falling on
giving
us?
you, issuing a variance with a condition to give you time to deal with the owner, and at which time, if development brought sidewalks to that property, then looking at putting sidewalks in at that time?
I mean, I can't say no to it. My personal opinion, or as a business owner, would be I would be perfectly fine with it if it fell back on the property, fell back to the landowner, and whatever percentage that we own of that. And if we own the most, if we own 75% of it, then we're responsible for 75% of whatever. You know, I guess that would be an argument between us and the building
Yeah, I
owner
mean, that's
too.
not-
Right, that's not y'all, that's us. But I would
Let
rather.
me jump in here real quick and just say, I don't think we can put a condition that one or the other party pay for it or bear the cost. Really, all we can do is say, I mean, I think the reason we're here is they wouldn't be asking for a variance if the statute hadn't been triggered, and we all agree that this requirement is in place, and what they're asking for is a variance so that they don't have to comply with that. And I think what we can do is either allow that or not allow that with conditions that are related to that. I don't think we can require a party who's not here to bear a cost, or for them, or to even require them to negotiate that. I think we can say something like, you know,
I wanted to get this lady, I can't remember your name, I'm sorry. Tell Betty.
Or the talker.
Okay, go ahead, Betty.
But I know that he's here speaking, and it was his business that that triggered the whole thing, but I just want to make it clear, the owner requested the variance, not them.
That's what I thought.
The owner of the property
Yeah.
is requesting the variance, they had to sign the application, it just so happens that it's affecting his CO. So, I mean, he's here to speak,
Yeah.
of course, but it's the owner that requested the variance.
Because it didn't matter to him
I
one
thought
way or
so.
the other.
So, I mean, if you approve it, then he doesn't have to put in a sidewalk no matter what transpires on that property anymore. If you deny it,
So,
somebody's gonna have to put a sidewalk in.
Now, what kind of
Okay, Ms. Cooper next.
what kind of condition could we put in place? I mean, we're talking
that's
about.
what I was going to say. So let me just. So I guess to give you a little background, I was a former congressman from Louisiana. I represented Louisiana District 5 and Washington D.C. And one thing I found about government is government's not bad, but government is only as good as you work with the confines of what's going on for every situation. So for this, you know, to me it would be simple. If you grant us the variance is only good until the sidewalks are completed each side, and then the variance is no longer good. That would be the condition. The variance is only good until sidewalks, as you said, in harmony, come there. Once sidewalks are connected to each side of us, then your variance is no good no more.
But the question becomes then the people who get triggered to do the sidewalks on either side of you come and they say, well, it's not in harmony because they're not doing it. Is there a way to list that property as, you know, if the other properties get triggered, then it becomes a joint trigger
I think
kind
the
of
other
thing?
property, if I understand it, the other properties are triggered.
Yeah, well, Papa John's is one right to next to us. No, I don't know about the car wash.
The car wash submitted be quiet eventually. The car wash submitted a revision to their site plan some years ago when they installed that interior track. That interior track was only underground. So when the site plan got approved, that sidewalk condition was not on there because they weren't making any exterior changes. What they did was build that carport awning. Had that been on the site plan, they would have been required to put in a sidewalk. They didn't build what they showed on their site.
So are they out of, okay.
I ain't
So
trying to
they're
get
out
nobody
of
else in
compliance.
trouble.
Papa John's next door has been triggered, and they are
Right.
in the process of
I'm doing the
also
same
seeking
thing.
a similar variance.
So can we approve the variance with the condition that it will be readdressed when we address the other two properties that are adjacent to his.
I think you could, I think the condition that he proposed, I think would be a valid condition, that you allow the variance, that they wouldn't have to build a sidewalk unless and until the adjoining property owners put in sidewalks or were required to put in sidewalks. And then at that point, they would be also required to put in a sidewalk.
But then again,
But
they would
then-
not be in harmony because there's
Well,
nothing else there.
Then
So,
you're just gonna be dealing with this issue again when Papa John's variance comes up, but that may be fine.
And I have one other question for Betty. What is being done about them being out of compliance?
That would be the
Is it
wait,
possible that
wait,
we?
just one moment. You've got to answer
Well,
questions.
one thing I like to highlight in terms of the sidewalks to nowhere comment, that's typical of all development throughout the town. In the development world, there's always going to be one or two developments that come first. And when those sidewalks are in, they aren't tying into anything. But throughout the development of the town, through us doing sidewalk improvements through grants, DOT putting sidewalks in, and property being developed, those connections will eventually be made. So that's the intent of us forcing or pushing forward with sidewalk requirements in some instances where they don't appear to tie in to anything at all.
Ms. Scarola?
Is it possible? Can you bring up the satellite view from above of that area?
I don't think they had one. Oh, yeah, yeah, you
But
didn't
no,
have the
wasn't
satellite.
there like the actual, like the ground, the actual view? Yeah,
Yeah, there was one,
it
yeah.
goes. Okay. So,
So Papa John's is on the right and the car wash is on the left,
John's is right.
on the two indentations. Okay.
So Papa John's, I can put them in from here to there. It's about 40 feet. And there's a power pole in between that area as well, which is their argument that they're making. And then the car wash.
You have a question about that?
is there any sidewalk
There
anywhere?
are
other
no
than that?
sidewalks in any direction on either side of the street. I went out there today to confirm.
What is the, I'm sorry,
Excuse me, yes, Ms. Cooper.
what is the situation with the left side street? That doesn't get sidewalks?
You mean?
Yeah.
That's an internal drive.
Yeah, that's an internal drive, so that's not technically a street. It's
Okay.
listed, but we wouldn't require them there. Yeah.
Right at
So
the
when you get
intersection.
into the shopping center, that's pretty much the end of that road.
I have another question. Rather than having a condition, and it's probably not something that you're considering doing, but since you are the town planner, I thought I would ask. What about putting in the sidewalks that you say you want and doing assessments on them? Do it in one, fell sweep. Do both sides of the street and assess them equally. It's
You mean
part
the
of what
town
you
putting in the
intend to be
sidewalks and
doing
assessing
anyway.
the property?
Excuse me?
You mean the town putting in the sidewalks and then assessing
Yes.
the property?
I think that's beyond the scope of.
Is
what's
it?
Yeah.
before the
Well, I
board.
thought I would ask because
I mean,
that would
it's-
make a lot of sense. You could do
Right.
it all at once, everybody would get the fair treatment.
But
Well, like-
that
like-
would be a suggestion to make to the Board of Commissioners.
Yeah.
To adopt something like that.
Mhm.
But our purpose here today is.
The request
do they
before
meet
you
the
with this
requirements
project.
for
Yeah.
variance on this particular ordinance.
And just to reiterate again, these conversations, and I understand the conversation owner versus tenant, which is why we moved forward with a massive change to our ordinance about 8 months ago. It was these type of conversations when you have Papa John's trying to put in a 200 square foot freezer and they're required to put in a $20,000 sidewalk. This almost impossible to put in. You have a beauty salon that didn't open. You have a daycare that didn't open. You have a church that didn't open, not because the development wasn't approved, but because they didn't have the ability or the financial means to put it in. That's what the argument is. So we did move forward with making those changes. It's just that this approval was granted prior to that, and they were not in a position to be able to take advantage of that change into the ordinance.
Now, I do have another question. because the way the unique shape of that property, where the space is, where the car wash is, will they have to, if they had to put in the sidewalk, would they have to skip that area and continue on like another 10 feet or so?
Talking about that little triangular piece?
Yes.
That's technically not, that's an entrance. If you look at this view here,
Okay, I see.
you wouldn't technically, I'm not sure we require a sidewalk right
Yeah.
there. That's almost like a little small.
Okay.
It's almost like a median. So technically, it would only be practical between
The big portion,
here and here.
yeah.
Along Main Street. But based on back to Mr. McAllister's argument, I completely understand the argument. It's just that it was a couple cases that came along after that where it didn't rise to the applicants asking for variances. We just noticed that the project never moved forward. And that was the reason why it was the expense of putting in the sidewalks. That I moved forward with a request to the Board of Commissioners, noticing that trend, and came with some ideas to kind of massage that, because the intent is to get sidewalks throughout the town. The intent is not to actually enforce regulations to the point where it stops businesses from opening. So that's why we actually had that ordinance change created, but this was after they had already filed for their approval for the site plan, and these requirements were already in place.
Excuse me, did I misunderstand you? Were you talking about the music store across the street in their change, that's why they didn't continue because of sidewalks?
No, that wasn't one of them. I said there were about 5 other businesses throughout the town
Oh, okay.
where it was a beauty salon, a church, and small businesses that were going inside existing structures. Because the change we made is if you're not doing new construction and you're doing renovations inside an existing structure, and you're not doing more than 50% of the overall change, and you're not adding any new construction to that existing structure, sidewalks will not be required. If it's a vacant lot and it's just new construction, then that would come into play. The music store was a different animal in
May I
itself.
ask a question? Since this ordinance has been passed, has any business put in sidewalks?
Since we made the change, or just period?
Well,
Has
Ordinance is-
anybody
Yeah.
been triggered to actually
yeah,
do the sidewalk
put
and
in
do
sidewalks at all.
Yeah, it happens quite often.
it? Here in Hope
I-
Mills?
And they've put them in, or you've issued a variance for 'em?
No, we have. It's been only about 2 variances granted. The other developments, I mean, we have sidewalk installation pretty regularly. Lowe's put in sidewalks. That was new construction. Typically, what triggers after the sidewalks are included are what we call third-party agreements. So it's a whole process. DOT approves the installation of the sidewalks to their standards, and then what we ultimately do on the back end is we issue what we call a third-party encroachment agreement. The developer is the first party, DOT is the second party, and we're the third party because the town of Hope Mills agrees to maintain the sidewalks once they're in. So sidewalk installation on developments does happen routinely, but there are instances where there's a tenant that is in an existing building that doesn't feel that that feels that the enforcement of the regulations is a little bit heavy-handed. But
Chick-fil-A, Biscuitville, those triggered sidewalks, but they
Yeah.
were vacant lots. But like the chiropractor next to Baldino's, on Rockfish, they did not renovate to the level that Chancellor called it more than 50%, so they did not trigger sidewalk.
But they
So we
came
had
in
it both
after
ways.
the new ordinance.
I'll tell you, they came in afterwards, but they specifically tracked that ordinance. They had been coming to a lot of the meetings, and they heard that we were moving forward with an ordinance of this magnitude, and they strategically waited until the ordinance was adopted, and then they filed for a site plan approval. Now, had they not done that, they would have been on the trigger for the same thing.
When we get a site plan in, we call Chancellor and say, what do you consider this more than 50% before we place that condition on the
Yeah.
condition sheet? Or we say, if it is deemed more than 50%, then sidewalks are triggered.
So back again, it's not beating up on Mr. McAllister. I completely understand the argument. It's just that at the time that they got the approval, these new changes were not in place.
You're doing your job.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone is ready to try to make a motion with conditions at this point.
I would like to make a
One
motion.
question. If you grant the variance on this, does the property now fall under the new variance? So if we was
No,
to sell
no,
or
it does
change
not.
or do anything, does the new
Not
variance?
with the condition.
Because you were
I don't
saying you
think.
don't ever, like the landowner would never have to put in sidewalks if they granted it, right?
Right, once the variance is approved,
But that's the variance of the old ordinance, correct? Does the new ordinance supersede the old ordinance?
If there's a subsequent change, I think.
So you follow what I'm saying? In other words, if we did something different with it 2 years from now, do we now follow the new ordinance?
I think anything done in the future would fall under the
Okay.
current ordinance.
That's
Whatever
what- that's what I wanna
ordinance is
make
in
sure.
place at the time.
And that was a question that I had.
But the variance
Chairwoman?
condition
Yes.
would
Okay.
run with the land until a change. is
Until a
made.
change, okay.
Ms. Cooper has
Or
another
until
question.
the
I'm sorry.
condition is met.
Well, I was just trying to follow, who does the variance go to? Does it go to the property owner, or does it go to Surge the business,
It goes to the land.
Doesn't say.
to the land?
The variance would be for the property, correct?
And see, that's where I'm back to being confused again. Why are we paying something for the property?
So the variance is for the use that has been changed to indoor recreation.
The-
So as long
The
as
variance
it-
is for the you can't do a use variance, so the variance is for the property.
Right, but
The use
By
triggered
it
the
becoming
sidewalk.
indoor
The variance is
recreation.
from the sidewalk.
so if it went to anything other than indoor recreation, it would trigger again?
Well, it would trigger the new variance, correct?
Right.
The new one that y'all passed, 50%, had to be 50% inside done.
The new change only applies to new construction and any internal renovation more than 50%. So if they left today and a grocery store came back, that's another change of use. This triggers for change of use if that change of use does not meet that threshold that we just put in place. Meaning that if they actually tear down half the building and they do a significant amount of things, even though it's a change of use that would typically trigger the sidewalks, if they didn't fit within that new threshold of changes that we made, then the sidewalks will be required.
Okay. So the variance with condition, if we put one in place, will run with the use of the land as long as it remains an indoor recreation.
If they change the use, it would just fall under the new ordinance, and
It would
anything
trigger
that
a
triggered
new-
it under the new ordinance would trigger a new requirement.
Now, one thing I want to highlight to you guys as well, the reason why I put this legislative template up, in the event, not with this case, but let's say you get a controversial case and it goes to court, it's my suggestion that you vote on each one of these individually.
That's what I
So
was
you find a
getting ready to
finding of
ask.
fact of the first one, you find a finding of fact, and you vote on the second one, so that if you just find a fact and you vote on all of them together and someone appeals it, you don't have a way of addressing why you approved it under condition one. What were the finding of fact under condition two? So I just wanted to kind of guide you. Whatever decision you make, I think you should do it each criteria individually.
Okay, does anyone have a motion, first of all, that they have met all the criteria
Well,
for
I'll-
granting a variance, and then going one by one as with a vote?
I would
Does one
start
person
going
do
one
it?
by one
Okay.
through each
So does
requirement.
anyone, but you can have different people doing it? Or one person?
Well, I
Has
think
to be one, doesn't
I
it?
don't think anyone necessarily needs to make a motion. I think as chairperson of the board, you can just say, okay, let's vote on whether they have met the first requirement.
Yeah.
Okay, all
And I think what he's saying, it doesn't matter who makes the motion. The
Right.
key is that each motion requires a 4/5 vote, no matter
Exactly.
which way you vote to approve or deny.
Okay, well, is everyone ready to look at the criteria
Yes.
and see if they've met at least the variance necessities? Yes. Okay, unnecessary hardship does not require a showing that no reasonable use can be made of the property. Does everyone agree, or who does agree by raising your right hand that
Can
they
you
have met?
elaborate on that? Can he,
Yeah.
Sure.
how about this, since this is the first one, just walk through each one and explain it again, so
Okay.
we all have an understanding of what we're voting on?
So an unnecessary hardship, the concept is, I mean, anytime you've imposed a regulation on someone, that's a hardship. They have to do something that they don't want to do. What this requirement is an unnecessary hardship. That what you're asking them to do is not really necessary. You're asking them to do something sort of above and beyond what's generally required, and that's imposing not just a hardship, but an unnecessarily burdensome hardship. In other words, it's not just that they have to do something they don't want to do, it's that it's a little bit higher than that they have to do something that really is not necessary at all for them to do.
What is the reasonable use can be made part of that?
So that's what that is explaining that unnecessary hardship doesn't mean that they can't use the property if this variance isn't granted. So if someone came in here and said, I would like a variance, and you know, a reason that you couldn't say, well, you don't have an unnecessary hardship because you can still use your property. Unnecessary hardship doesn't mean that use of the property is rendered, you know, the property is rendered unusable. It just means that it's unnecessary hardship.
So my defense to that would be, we didn't do nothing to the outside. We didn't change any landscaping, we didn't change anything to the exterior or do anything, so my work was only on the inside. So had I changed it, then maybe I should be putting sidewalks in.
Well, if I may, I think the standard is not intent or, I mean, I think that whether something is triggered or not is not an issue tonight, but it's just is requiring him to put sidewalks in an unnecessary hardship. If that
I
makes
think
sense.
we need to also consider before we go through these and vote for them, that we're not saying that there's a variance just for the trampoline park. We're saying that there's a variance for the owner and the entire building. That's what we're saying,
For
correct?
the applicant's property.
The applicant who owns the entire thing. We're saying that he, the owner, also meets these criteria. We have to think about that.
Right, yes.
Because if we say, if we think that it's unfair, for instance, that the trampoline park has to bear the burden of the entire development, we may be letting them off, but we're also letting off the owner of the property. That's where my dilemma is.
Mine too, because they're not here to even ask the question, are they concerned?
Can we move to the second, or are we going to vote?
Well, we haven't voted on it yet because I wanted to bring up the fact that we're saying that there is an unnecessary hardship.
On their part, the trampoline part, but not on the owners.
Yeah.
I would caution not to get too caught up in owner versus applicant. I think that it's basically is the request for a variance from the subdivision ordinance that requires sidewalks an unnecessary hardship in period, regardless of who would be required to put it in, because our ordinance does not give us the authority as staff to make that determination on who it is. So I think what you're looking at is, like what he explained, you don't have to determine whether or not the property is rendered unusable or unbuildable. You're just ultimately making a distinction or determination on, is this actual requirement to put in sidewalks an unnecessary hardship on whoever would be required to put them
on
in
this particular property.
on this particular property.
Well, we can take a vote on that then and see whether it establishes an unnecessary hardship, which does not require a showing that no reasonable use can be made of the property. So does it establish an unnecessary hardship?
Are we going to vote by raising our hand?
Yes,
And I was
just,
gonna please, we fill out a variance order for the property owner if it's approved,
Mhm.
and it lists the 4 findings, and then underneath it, we insert whatever you want.
Findings of fact.
say That
Mhm.
meets or does not meet that, so we encourage you
To elaborate.
discuss it, because I need information to be able to put in each slot, so, if you can, just don't say finding 1, yes or no.
Okay.
Tell us why, so we have
Right.
information to put.
okay.
I
yes.
would vote no on the unnecessary hardship portion. I believe that the name on the applicant is the owner, not necessarily Mr. McAllister, nothing against you. But for that portion of the criterion, I would vote that, that it would be something that not only could the owner do, the owner should do.
Another thing I want to highlight too, you have to vote yes on all 4 to grant the variance.
Really?
And so not only does it require 4/5 votes, it does have to actually meet all 4 of these criteria.
Then we tack on the conditions.
Correct.
Yes.
So if we don't think it's
If it doesn't meet the
established
criteria,
all
That's
four,
one reason why
we
I
can't
said
even
I
put
wouldn't
conditions on
make a
it.
distinction between owner versus applicant.
Okay.
Because
Well,
our
yeah.
requirements don't make that distinction either.
Yeah, but I think you have to think about it in terms of the property itself.
Okay.
Not necessarily who's here,
Mhm.
but
Yeah.
is this ordinance being applied to this property creating an unnecessary hardship?
Okay,
Then I change my vote.
okay. All right. We'll let you do it one at a
Well-
time then, and you tell us why, and then we'll go down the line and say whether we agree with that or not.
I do believe that it does meet the unnecessary hardship, and that it should have a condition, because once the other properties are evaluated and decided upon, then I think it should be triggered again and a decision made at that time, a permanent decision.
Okay, and then we have, Ms. Craver.
I really don't think that the owners of the property, and I know we go back to that, I don't think they should have to pay for it, but the owners should. I don't think, since they're not here, they have not provided us with a hardship. But if we have to approve all of them to let them trampoline people not pay, I vote yes.
I'll let you go next, Ms. Corolla.
You know, basing it off of facts and the fact that it may have not been the leasing, the person who leased the building. They might not have seen the application when it was filed for, but ultimately, I mean, you know, you gotta look at your paperwork. It's a big thing. So I'm gonna say no, because the paperwork was signed. You know, that's falls on your responsibility, the business, you know, the property owner's responsibility, and like, you know, you said, you know, ignorance, you know, you can't you know, bypass the law because you're ignorant of it. So I'm saying no.
Okay, Mr. Marlowe?
I'll say yes.
Okay, do you have a reason why you're saying yes? It's already been given, okay. I also would vote yes because I believe that it's a portion of the full property, whether it's being leased, thinking of the property only, and that it's being given an unfair treatment in this case. So in this case, we have met condition number 1, 4 out of 5. And let's move on to the next one. Hardship results from conditions particular to the property. And that means hardships resulting from personal circumstances or which are common in the neighborhood or general public cannot be common in the neighborhood or general public cannot be considered. Okay, hardship results from conditions particular to the property. Hardships resulting from personal circumstances or which are common in the neighborhood or general public cannot be considered. Okay,
Now, my understanding from the training we received on this was that that particularly means that the variance is being granted for the hardship to search and only search. We're not talking about hardships other properties adjacent might encounter at a later date.
Well, what this one means is that whatever hardship, so you've now found as a board, there is an unnecessary hardship applying this ordinance to this property. What this condition is that whatever hardship y'all found is not related to the owner, the applicant,
The neighborhood,
lessor,
stuff like that.
it's, or any individual, it's related to conditions particular to the property, such as the size of the property, the location of the property,
The fact
the
that
zoning of the property. There's something particular to the property itself. So this one can't be, well, it's hard, it's gonna cost money for them.
Well, this would be one where we'd say, well, by not putting the sidewalks in, we're keeping in harmony with the area or the,
That's slightly different.
That's,
Okay.
Yeah, that's criterion 4.
That's
technically.
trying to find, yeah, that fits more in with number 4. This one means that whatever hardship y'all found is related to something about the property.
That's unique to
itself.
that property.
Not the cost of compliance, not the fact that, well, someone's gonna have to put this sidewalk in and that's not fair to that person to spend that money. It's something, the hardship is related to something about that piece of property that is unique to that property,
Like
beyond- different than the surrounding properties.
Will
So
it
in
be-
other words,
I'm sorry, would-
Well, I
like
was
an
gonna
example
say-
would be like say there was a moat around the property and you couldn't put a sidewalk in because there's a moat there. Would that be?
Exactly.
That would be-
But if there's a moat around a neighborhood and everyone has a moat, then you can't make that argument for one property. So that's what they mean by
essentially,
can't
if
be
the
common
next
for the.
3 properties can come in here and make the same argument, then that's not a condition unique to that property.
okay. Well, I would say, or at least my belief is that the hardship does result from conditions particular to this property because they did no external building. They did not add on externally to this property where the other 2 properties that, are future contenders did. So for him, the fact that all of the work was done within the confines of the building that he's leasing in order to prepare it for business, which is what he was doing, which is what you would expect for anybody taking or leasing a property. They're going to make it their own for that particular business. That is all that he did. He didn't add structures. He didn't add a refrigerator or a freezer. He didn't add an awning. He didn't add anything other than a sign saying this is now open. So I would say that the hardship does result from conditions particular to his property because he did not do anything external to the building.
Ms. Craver?
But again,
Oh.
if I could clarify, it's not related to what he did or didn't do to the property, it's related to the property itself.
Well, no, okay, so no
Yes.
building took place. The trigger was not for any external building.
Okay.
Just let me clarify, I think what he's trying to say is any property that came in here, regardless of whether they only did interior work or exterior stuff, but it was a change in use, would be required to do a sidewalk.
Right.
It isn't just because he only did interior work or did no outside work. It was the change in use itself, not where he did the work that triggered the sidewalk.
I do understand, but I still believe that the hardship results from conditions particular to this property because from everything I've read, the harmony, the intent of the variance and all of that, what this property did, in my belief, according to the statute, the ordinance 102, was not significant enough to trigger this hardship, essentially. That if he had done something more tangible that would have required a sidewalk being put in because the layout of the property changed or extended or something, I could see that as a reasonable, reason to have to put in a sidewalk.
Excuse me, that sounds like something that you might want to add in the next amendment to the sidewalks.
Now say that last piece again. I was conferring with the attorney.
That his use of the property, the applicant's change of use of the property, did not in any way change the footprint of the
Of the
property.
building. Okay.
And that it did not, so therefore should not require substantial change now to the footprint of the property. I mean, if he didn't change the footprint, why are we forcing him to now change the footprint?
Hey, I can give you one thing that's unique to that property. If we're talking about just the property, go to the picture out the front. See that big retaining wall?
Yeah,
That's a little bit different than just building a sidewalk on ground out there.
yeah.
You know, with engineering the foundation, everything that you got to go through to just build a sidewalk when, like you said, we didn't do nothing outside.
Right.
I don't know if it helps y'all or not, but there's at least something that's unique to that property that's not on either side of us.
Well, it just doesn't seem like an ordinance should force you to change the footprint of property when you didn't change the footprint of property.
One thing I'd like to bring out too, in terms of the criterion, in terms of adjacent, the Papa John's does not have a retaining wall, and the car wash does not have a retaining wall.
Okay.
That's
Okay.
those are facts that are.
And that's not his fault.
No, that's pre-existing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that would be a good example
Yeah,
of
it
something,
would.
a condition that is particular to that property.
Good. Yes,
I'm
she's
voting
voting
yes.
yes. Okay.
Sorry. I was
Okay,
trying to
you were
get the right
next.
I
word.
vote yes too.
And I also vote yes, and for the same reasons. Thank you very much. We appreciate it, Elizabeth.
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Yes.
Joanne? Yes, okay. So the second criteria has been met. Go on to the third one. The hardship did not result from actions taken by the applicant. That's
Again, he
fairly
didn't
simple.
change the footprint. I mean, he made no action outside that it would have become a safety issue. You know what I mean? Or something along those lines. It was him doing, what he did, open a business, which is not a bad thing.
Okay, that was a yes.
Yes.
Yes for me as well.
And yes, we saw nothing unusual that he did to create this. So yes, and yes from you?
Yes.
Okay. 5 yeses on the hardship did not result from actions taken by the applicant. Fourth one, requested variance is consistent with the spirit, purpose, and intent of the ordinance. Now, you have to remember, it's a short sidewalk ordinance. It just says what we've read before. It says only if you're commercial, you have to have a sidewalk.
Well, and
That's-
if I may, though, you can consider the ordinance as a whole. You don't have to consider that
Just the
narrow
sidewalk
section of
Oh, yeah,
the
okay,
ordinance. You
yeah.
can consider the entirety of the
Mm-hmm.
ordinance.
So as far as
Okay.
the requested variance and consistent spirit and purpose and intent, I've mentioned quite a few times that I feel that by granting the variance, conditional on the decisions made adjacent to his property, that a variance should be put in place because I don't think the intent was to unduly hardship new business owners who are coming in and leasing property.
Okay, Ms. Craven?
Yes.
Okay, and I'll go down to the end, I'll be last again. Go ahead, Joanne.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, okay, and I also say yes. And another thing too is that we do have the Southwest Cumberland Land Use Plan, which does say 2 sidewalks eventually in front of all commercial. So it's a move toward that. I think that at this time, do we make the motion with the variance, or what do we do now?
Well, I think before you
With-
grant,
I mean, with the,
you grant the variance, you
exception.
decide if you want to include a condition on any variance that may be granted. You found that they've met the criteria, and if you're going to grant the variance with a condition, you need to decide what that condition is before I think you vote to grant the variance.
Does anyone want to say it again, other than Ms. Cooper? Okay.
I'm happy to motion to do the variance or approve the variance, condition being that if the adjacent properties are forced to go ahead and do their sidewalks, that at that time, you will also be required to meet them in the middle, so to speak.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor. I guess we will vote on it, or do we have? Mhm.
Would that now, would that be attached to our CO, or would that be something that goes back to the property? What I'm trying to do is figure out where do I have feet to stand on when it
It
goes
runs
back
with
to-
the land.
It's attached to the variance.
Yeah,
So-
my response to that ultimately is that he has a temporary CO in place until this variance is heard on. If you are hearing the variance and ultimately deciding to grant it based on conditions, you're granting it based on my understanding that these sidewalks will not be required until the adjacent properties have to come in and do theirs. So technically, the CO would more than likely be lifted until that time that he will be triggered to put in the sidewalks. Now, at the time that the adjacent properties come in, it triggers your condition. If he decides not to move forward with sidewalks, then we have a problem. But based on it sounds like what I'm hearing you approve, it sounds like we can issue a lifting of the temporary CO because he's actually been granted the ability to vary from the code based on the condition.
Until such time as the surrounding properties are required to put in sidewalks.
Yeah, the only thing I'm just trying to clarify is when they're built on each side of us, and I'm totally not against that at all, because we want to look uniformity when it happens, but does that trigger go back to the applicant, which was J.R. Smith for the variance, and then it trickles down to us? I'm trying to figure out where my leverage is to.
I don't think we as a board can weigh in on who has to pay
No, who has to
or,
pay?
or who's
Who's gonna
required.
get the notification that is it gonna be the property itself, the
I think
owner of the property?
Chancellor, would it?
I think based on this conversation, if it got to that point, we would just make it very, very clear. We would notify just everybody,
Okay.
the owner, the applicant, just so that, because I understand the confusion that was in place here.
I just didn't want to fall completely
Yeah.
back on our shoulders.
Yeah.
As long as you throw him in the pool with us, we can
Right, but
put six
remember,
rings fast.
And then y'all will have to
requirement
put that.
to put the sidewalks in will be on the property itself. The owner could come and say, well, I'm not putting it in, you're gonna put the bill. And then-
Right, but that's an
Yeah.
argument between us and the other.
Right,
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
Absolutely.
He's just talking about once, let's say a year goes by before this happens, he wants to make sure that he's notified and the owner. He'll work out the issue with the owner on how they do it. He just wants to make sure all parties involved are notified when that trigger takes place.
And that can be reflected in the variance order.
That's correct. We can reflect that in the condition.
Ms. Craven?
What am I supposed to do to vote?
So there's a motion on the floor.
We got a motion that we're
I
gonna have the.
I don't have a
vari-
discussion.
Oh, okay.
So if you're ready to vote, I'll vote.
Yes, okay,
So,
Yeah.
okay, so,
Does
does
anybody-
anyone want to discuss anything
This
else
is
about it?
The motion to approve the variance with the condition stated in the record.
That's right. Okay,
Yeah.
anyone voting?
Yep.
Okay, we have 5 ayes, so that does pass. We do have the condition attached to the variance as was stated. And then, as I understand it, then when other businesses come up that are adjacent, they will be asking for the same thing. And at that point, it will trigger the sidewalk being built. And at that time, you will work out with your owner of the property who pays for what, but at that time, it will be completed. Is that correct?
Well, if they.
if they
are
don't get
requesting
their
a variance,
variances.
Which,
If they don't get their variance, yeah.
yes, correct. If you deny a variance to an adjoining property owner, or they don't seek a variance, and this requirement is triggered and they do have to build a sidewalk, then that would.
Trigger him to have to
the
put in
condition
his.
On this variance, and then require him to build a sidewalk, or require the property to have a
My
sidewalk.
understanding would be just whenever a sidewalk comes up to one side of us or the other.
You
then
just
we have-
tie in.
We got to tie in and continue going.
Yeah,
And then it will fall on the next landowner, he can come in and argue why he.
Yeah.
Our sidewalk's there. You know, if you want to be the odd guy out, then you're the odd guy out.
Well, to clarify, I think the condition, if I'm understanding it correctly, is once they are required to build a sidewalk, not necessarily once construction is complete. So once
Once
the
they're
adjoining
required.
property owner is required to put in a sidewalk, then the condition on this variance comes into play, and then the entire property that's subject to the variance tonight is required to put in a sidewalk as well.
And
Any kind of deadline time frame we're putting there? When we'll start?
it all depends when
I
they,
don't think there would be a
That's just whenever that happens.
deadline. It's if you've got a variance until such time as that happens.
No, I was talking about for.
After it
construction start,
triggers.
Once it's triggered. like-
Oh, whatever the standard. I mean, I don't know that there's a.
How long do people
2 years,
generally
3
get?
years.
In terms of once construction starts until you can complete it?
Whenever, let's say Papa John's has put their sidewalk in, and y'all got the notification, they're putting theirs in. They've got to do it, so then it triggers our variance, and now we have to put ours in because they're adjacent. From that time that it triggers it, how many days we have to start construction on the sidewalk? You
That's,
can't tell me to start tomorrow.
yeah, I mean, that's something we'd have to work out. Well, we don't have,
Do it, but I'd rather you not.
I don't think there's a time limit in our ordinance that dictates that. I think that's something we would work with you to give a reasonable amount of time.
and I wanted to make one comment too, that, and I know that Ms. Cooper already said this too, but by having the little sidewalk to nowhere with an end here and an end there, and there's not a lot of harmony and uniformity in the area by doing that, even though we know we want a sidewalk and it has to start somewhere. But I think if we do it all together, little by little, we'll get a sidewalk, and then and hopefully someone across the street is going to come in and trigger something. And then we can get a sidewalk across the street as well, and that's what we're looking for, is sidewalks on both sides.
We like not having a sidewalk. Right up by the front of the store, they walk right in, get an ice, some cold drink, they decide to jump a little bit, and they go right back out. So, we'll put them in.
Okay, anything else? Do we have a motion to adjourn? We do, and we vote for that. Ayes on the right hand? Yep, okay. We're adjourned. Thank you.